Welcome to the podcast for the world builders, where we dive into the spells and strategies for Black feminist world building and creative actualization. These weekly podcasts and newsletters are presented by Seeda School, where all of this theory that we dig into, explore, toss around in our heads and our hearts. Inside of Seeda School, all this all this theory that we talk about inside these podcasts, we try to practice them inside of the school. And speaking of Seeda School, exciting news, super exciting news. As promised last week, registration for the winter 2025 World Building Workshop Series is now open. We do this every season. It's a free 4-part World Building Workshop Series, and it's an opportunity for me to get to like meet and dream alongside y'all, right? But then it's also an opportunity for you to learn more about Seeda School and the offering inside, specifically the Treehouse. To It's a chance for us to like, if you've been engaging with the newsletters and podcasts, it's a time for us to like spend some synchronous time dreaming together. It's a time for you to learn more about the Treehouse, but it's also jam-packed with value that allows you to think about what it would look like to resource your interdisciplinary practice through an income generating creative offer that is aligned with both your values, right? Your politic and your desire. We find that often those things are overlapping in our practices when it feels aligned. So it's 4 parts. Part one, see the world rooted in the truth of your desire. We're going to locate your zone of desire and kind of like let all the other stuff kind of fall to the background so we can figure out, okay, what is spirit calling me to work on right now? Because that is the kind of most consistent channel of power that we want to keep open and rely on to charge our entire practice. Once we figure that out, once we locate your zone of desire, then we figure out, okay, we discover your creative dispatch, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly. We focus on the cadence of weekliness just to give our zone of desire structure, right? We can often find in jobs and in schools, they have structures and, time blocks and deadlines that are put on us. Sometimes those can be helpful. Sometimes those aren't helpful, right? But I find inside of weekly or bi-weekly cadence, that gives our zone of desire structure, and it allows us to be in creative practice, be in consistent creative flow. So we figure out, okay, what's your weekly dispatch container? Part three, we figure out, okay, what's your creative offer, right? That weekly dispatch is like list building towards, right? We're list building each week. We're visiting our zone of desire each week through our creative dispatch. And that creates an opportunity where we then can invite folks. We have a audience to invite into our offer, right? Part one, we're figuring out your zone of desire. Part two, we're figuring out your creative dispatch. Part three, we're figuring out what that creative offer might be that you may announce or release through your creative dispatches, market through your creative dispatches. And then part four, we talk about the general work of resourcing a world rooted in the truth of our needs, right? And we remember our needs and our desires, again, are often overlapping themes. So we're opening registration a little earlier. You may have noticed for the winter season, just to accommodate, right, all the away from keyboard time that we'll rightfully be spending in the coming weeks. But here's your invitation to remember to register before getting swept away in the end of the year time warp. And I hope these podcasts are also just like friendly kind of companions as you have a little bit more free time during this holiday season. So yeah, that time between Christmas and New Year's where one week turns into one long day. Let's register before before that happens. So link is in the show notes as always if you want to check it out and if you want to world build with us this winter. But as always, I am so honored to be learning and practicing alongside you today. If this is your first episode, thank you for tuning in. And if you are returning, thank you for coming back. We always say in Seeda School, our favorite ritual is return, right? If that's the only ritual we have is return, that usually is the only one we need. So thank you for practicing that today. Before diving in, right? If you are returning, you know our podcast ritual, which is our ritual whenever we gather, which is to ground ourselves and give ourselves permission to breathe into the present moment. As world builders, it can be so easy for us to like get lost in the archives and studying the past. And then, escape into the future, dreaming into the future. But there is true power in dropping and being able to drop into the present and have our feet like firmly rooted on the ground as we fly, right? So let's do that together. Let's get curious about what's happening inside of our sensorium. Let's take 3 deep, full belly breaths, if that feels possible in this moment. All right, y'all, let's begin. Hmm. Now let's note one thing in our sensorium, something that we were maybe able to see, touch, taste, smell, hear, something we were able to maybe feel beyond the senses we have language for. Let's drop into that. What can I sense in the present moment? I can smell an incense burning. I'm hearing like the peering, the steps of family members outside of my office. It's that holiday season, so I am surrounded by family, which is just a beautiful feeling. Um, and I felt my hand on my heart, and I felt the rhythm of my heartbeat just now. What about you? What could you sense in that pocket of pulse? Now let's check in on our mood and intention right now in this very moment, right? My mood. I am filled with gratitude and pride. I'm grateful and proud, right? Last episode, I talked about how the systems in my business are now so well oiled that it's like it's getting boring, right? We're chopping wood and we're carrying water. And this isn't a bad boring, right? This isn't a dull boring. It's actually a boring full of like sensuous texture. This is a good boring, something like peace, right? Something like ease, something I prayed, right? And I worked for and was super diligent about. I still love my work, right? I'm still returning to my newsletters, this podcast, right? Our weekly open studio, sessions inside the retreat, our monthly marketing workshops, our guided meditations inside the treehouse, right? I'm still returning to all of that work with a charge that is still consistently compelling and curious, right? Because I'm working in my zone of desire. I'm grateful and proud because of this like newfound capacity to let the seasons of ease be easy. Right. Again, I'm grateful and proud because I know how hard I worked to get here. Right. This ease was always the goal, and it's what I teach. Right? I have a stable, predictable, creative business that gives me the spaciousness I desire to write, right? Take long walks in the forest, talk to my ancestors, talk to my dad, spend quality time with my loved ones, etc. Right? It's happening. I've done it, right? And I'm letting myself feel that. And my old self-sabotaging pattern would have been to invent new projects, right? New offers, new distracting deadlines, right? Creating some drama to subconsciously take me to the edge of my capacity because no, right? You don't deserve this. You don't deserve this ease. Your life can't be this good, right? It can't be exactly how you desire, exactly how you designed it. No, no, no. And I'm so grateful, right, to be at a stage in my journey where I can tell that voice that is trying to, in its own way, trying to protect me. I can tell that voice, which, by the way, right, is completely informed by my complex trauma and racial capitalism, right? But I can now tell that voice, it actually can be exactly how I designed it. And so it is. And so it is. What's your mood? How are you arriving? Right? Can we give ourselves 3 seconds to feel what we feel without judgment? Let's pause and check in here. Now, if we shift towards intention, in this episode, I want to make the case for breaking from institutions and creating communal containers of healing instead, right? And because we're all about the spell and the strategy at Seeda School, it is also my intention to make the argument that if you are writing countless grants, drafting applications, making pitches and proposals and bids for fellowship in institutions that sometimes or usually, right, gets awarded, then you are already good at sales. That's the case I want to make in this episode. And like an even deeper case that I want to make is, through this episode, is I want to invite you to turn that skill, right, toward creating deeper pathways of empowerment for yourself and your communities, not institutions who siphon our world building capacity for their own survival. Nah, this episode is about our survival, our collective ability to thrive. More on that later, but what is your intention behind listening to this episode, right? You do nothing without intention. I'm going to pause here and let you reflect on that. What's your intention behind listening or doing whatever it is you're doing right now? All right. Now that we've grounded inside of our sensorium, our mood, and in our intention, right? Let's talk about, let's get into episode 66, moving from convincing institutions to convincing the people. You have trained as a grant-funded artist. You have trained as a burned out artist working multiple gigs. You have trained as a full-time employee with no capacity for her art practice. What you have not trained for is life as an interdependent artist. This is an entry I wrote in my journal, and the passage I wanted to kick this episode off with, because while I have been a practicing artist and cultural worker for the last decade, I'm going to be honest, majority of that time was spent never fully, like somatically, fully trusting my practice's ability or capacity, right, to cover my material and financial needs. Which is to say, I spent majority of that time, a decade of practice, never trusting myself to figure out how to leverage my skills, my story, and spiritual inheritance to create a contribution that would be right on time for others. I looked around and it seemed there were about 3 ways that we were making our art practices like quote unquote work, right? And number 1, get a job with the university. I'm not even going to go down the influencer path because I don't think like that's a whole different thing, right? But there were three pathways that I started to see. It was number one, get a job with the university, which like didn't seem like an option for me because I refused to go to grad school. Number two, get a full-time job, which I did. And working in person from 9 to 5, you know, was one thing, but it was probably the consistent masking alone that nearly killed me, right? And there's like this third option, which was apply for as many grants as you can find, right? And cobble them together in ways that get you through the next month, right? The next 3 months, if we're lucky, the next 6 months, if God really wanted to give a bitch a break, right? And that's how I lived for years, right? Living off of grants and monetary awards from art institutions is what I want to focus on today, because I think a lot of us are in this loop and in this cycle. Why did I live like this for years? Why, right? Structuring my entire financial reality around art institutions, accepting or denying my applications, right? That in some way bestowed or revoked permission for me to do my work. Why? Well, in my 20s, I'm gonna be honest, y'all, I wanted nothing more than to be a darling of the art world. In my young mind at the time, it seemed that what was most important to be considered like a real artist, right, was to number one, have a studio. And those moments when I had studio residencies, those moments felt like, okay, you're doing it, you're making it, right? And then number two, the other thing that seemed really important was being able to direct all my attention to the work, right? Capital T, capital W. That means no outside jobs, just the work, right? And this extremely limited assumption, an idea of what it meant to be a quote unquote real artist, right? Often, guess what? Left me with no money and completely dependent on art institutions completely. I don't think it's an accident that those two things are most glorified in the art world, right? Having a studio and like being a full-time artist, right? They're incredibly glorified, and they have a way of leaving you in your practice dangerously codependent on institutions, especially as an emerging artist, as a young artist, right? It's a trick bag that puts us in a persistent posture of precarity. And I lived it for years. I would have occasional part-time jobs, as most artists without access to generational wealth do. But there was a period of time when artist grants and fellowships were truly, like I said, the bedrock, the financial bedrock of my practice and my livelihood. And I'm sure if I kept going, I would have achieved a level of financial wellness that would eventually have made me less dependent on institutions. But for Black women artists, that can take decades. And to what end, right? In my 20s, I wanted nothing more than to be a darling of the art world. Now I want nothing more than to be of service to the people I'm in love with, which is you. Showing up for you was always the goal, right? And there was a time when I really did, I thought collaborating with and inside of institutions was the only way to make that possible. When I started exploring other options, the biggest critique of my own work, right? We got to critique our own work. The biggest critique of my own work was, am I co-opting the work of Black feminists for personal gain? First of all, I eventually realized the answer to that is yes, right? I absolutely am. And the truth is, we're all leveraging the value of a Black feminist politic in our personal lives to make it better, right? Because that's what a Black feminist politic does. It just makes our lives better. And we're all doing that. We're all leveraging that power, that value, whether we want to cite Black feminism or not. But the personal point of critique I was most concerned with in my own practice was like, was I diluting the power and potency of Black feminism as a politic inside the context of entrepreneurship and small business? And what allowed me to move forward beyond this critique was, for like most of the Black feminists I cite, their work was made possible by institutions. Right? We don't have to dig far and wide to notice that pattern. June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Toni Cade Bambara, and so many more all taught inside the academy. And many Black feminists do still to this day, for better or for worse, right? Some of our favorite Black feminist texts still come out of Duke University Press. Look at your bookshelf, right? What does this mean for those of us who insist on surviving capitalism, insist on getting paid for our research and practice, but want nothing to do with our labor being entangled with stabilizing the state and colonial order? Back to my journal entry. What does this mean for those of us who desire to train as interdependent artists for once? Right? Commit to a life of creative refusal for once. Right? Fuck around. For those of us who want to fuck around and find out for once. I thought to myself, perhaps one solution beyond, or alongside getting a job with the university, working full-time, or cobbling together artist grants is to experiment with creating income-generating offers. So I made the decision that I was going to help other artists, cultural workers, facilitators, care workers, community organizers, etc., create contexts for inventing and collaborating with Black feminist theory and praxis outside of art and academic institutions, right? Inside my young erotic hubris, I wanted to free Black feminist thought. This was my desire, and if I'm honest, it still is. Perhaps you'll come up with another solution rooted inside your desire, and I hope so, right? We need as many solutions as we can dream up. The solution I'm working inside of is introducing creative offers inside of our interdisciplinary creative ecosystems. And listen, practicing in public has its challenges, but the opportunities for vulnerability and accountability it opens up are highly instructive for Black feminist praxis and world building, I have found. Right. So, and I'm others have found as well. Right. And here's what I want to invite you to consider this week. If you are writing excellent grant, fellowship, and pitch proposals that usually land you the funds, residency, opportunities, etc., right? Odds are you're already good at sales. Which just means if we got cringy and itchy and like, ooh, sales, listen, being good at sales just means, and sales in alignment, again, always with our desire and values, being good at that texture of sales just means that we are good at storytelling, right? And forming narrative connections. And this is an essential skill for communicating transformative value in ways that are aligned with our politics, right? And values, right? Like this is an essential world building skill because we can't build worlds alone, right? We gotta have the buy-in and collaboration of others. And if we find ourselves landing these applications and these pitches and people saying yes to us, odds are we are good at communicating the value of our ideas. And what I'm saying is, like, what does it look like for us to be communicating the values of our creative offers and us leveraging our own agency to generate income that isn't dependent on institutions saying yes and greenlighting our projects. And what's interesting is just this week, actually, I was on a jury panel for helping select research and project grant recipients. And time again, the strongest proposals felt like the ones that did a good job of telling the story of their practice, right? And the relevant urgency of their project. Again, telling the story. Inside these particular applications, I was sold. I was convinced, right? I was invested in the project. And as artists, we can use the same storytelling skills when pitching our offer and asking for the sale, especially when your solution is relevant and urgent for the communities you dream of serving through your offer, right? Especially when your offer fills a gap. So what's my point? The longer I do this, the more I realize, right? The skills we've cultivated as artists who survive capitalism through collaborating with art organizations are the same world building skills that we can transfer, right? Toward creating peer-led and peer-supported offers through collaborating with each other. This is what it means to move from convincing the institutions to convincing the people. And to be clear, right, if we're feeling a little weary about that word convincing, to be clear, it's less about convincing and more about being intentional about who you want to be accountable to, right? That's the key takeaway. Is shifting who we are answering to, right? If your work is for Black femmes, if your work is for Black trans folks, if your work is for Black disabled folks, if your work is for single Black parents looking for community, then what happens when you start talking directly to them, being accountable to them, answering to them, whose people, like whose opinions you actually care about, right? Because they have the context and information needed to form the opinion about your work in the first place. Right? What happens when you build an offering and share it directly with them instead of sharing it with the institutions who promise to platform the work in ways that will make it more accessible to the communities you care about? Although, if those communities are marginalized, then you know that almost is never true. In many cases, these institutions have a way of making the work less accessible. In the fall 2024 retreat, like this past most recent retreat, a world builder brought up the very real, right? And the very silent, sometimes not so silent expectation on artists to, right, perform our trauma for art institutions, right? This may ring true, and this may hit home for a lot of us. I can remember the indignity of trying to figure out all the right things to say in my applications, right? Because rent was due. So I said all the right things. Underrepresented, Black, marginalized, Black cyber feminist performing as, right, the unicorn Black girl in STEM. Child, we be twirling in these applications to get that coin. I can remember making appeals to white institutions to get them to allow me to do the work I wanted to do on my family's land, right? Land that they were enslaved on. And the indignity and the irony that I was still in that posture of dependence, it just became too much to bear. It became too much to bear. And it's why I released my art world dreams in 2022 and decided to begin to train as an interdependent artist instead. But again, right, the silent expectations and rewards for performing, perpetuating, and packaging our trauma for communities outside our own to consume is real. This is why we see artists making, figurative work about slavery or colonialism, receiving seemingly immediate acclaim, while artists practicing Black abstraction like Howardina Pindell having to wait until she's 70, right, to receive the resources and acclaim her work always demanded. No shade, no tea whatsoever. But we know what that's about. And listen, I'm clear the more legible work is important. I'm clear on that. I'm clear it has a place. Remember, I'm a poet, but I'm also an engineer. I'm clear we need the spell and the strategy. I'm clear the obfuscation, right, that can happen in academia and inside like wordy art school paragraphs and artist statement is sometimes worse than unhelpful, right? It's just plain boring, right? And the bad kind of boring. We need the work that's easier to read and translate. I get that. But there is an imbalance, right, in the amount of resources that, the abstract work that's dealing with our interior worlds and worlds not yet named receives. There's an imbalance in resources. And what I'm saying is it might be up to us to create that balance. That is our work. Because we have the most intimate relationship with its incalculable value. And because the value is incalculable, right, we can't count on capitalism to resource it. Time and time again, we see the legible illustrations of the wake allowed time, money, space, acclaim. While the work of Black abstraction, right, like the maroon technologies of mutual aid, care work, teach-ins, creative childcare solutions, turning bedrooms into landscapes for sexual education, turning living rooms into libraries, turning herb gardens into hood hospitals, turning public parks into hush harbors, building altars to talk to your dead across time and all other forms of interstellar interdependence. We see it time and time again. It remains under-resourced. Time and time again. We receive the messages that the work we need the most right now actually just explore freedoms that are too illegible to fund. Time and time again, we feel the art world say, you can freedom dream, baby. We just ain't gonna pay you to do it. You can make paintings and photographs and sculptures about your grandmother's house. We'll buy that. We'll collect that. We'll snatch that right on up. But that mutual aid campaign that you want to start to save your grandmother's house from developers, we don't know what to do about that. Woo! Like, in my response, right, to the art world, to academia, to nonprofits and foundations who claim they want to fund experimental praxis is, we do, right? We know what to do with that. We know what to do with our needs. We know what to do with our desires. We know what to do with our collective burning longing, right, to redistribute resources. Sometimes being more prevalent, right, than our longing to create more artwork or theory to live in the storages of wealthy white collectors and institutions. When we move from working for institutions to working for the people, we reclaim our capacity. We no longer have to summon the energy to convince gatekeepers on how important this ancestral freedom dreaming world building work is. Let's move away from working to win the trust of institutions and move toward seeking the trust of the people we make the work for, the people who inspired the work. For without these abstract relations, there would be no work. There would be no us. So now we're moving to the invitation portion of the podcast. And I'm going to invite you, just going to gently invite you to consider practicing a form of abstraction with us through creating income generating offers this winter, right? A form of abstraction where we call our power back. And we remember we have all the skills we need to skip the middleman of art institutions and go directly to like serving the folks who the work is for through our creative offerings. And if you want to learn more about how you might apply this invitation to your practice, then again, registration for the Winter 2025 World Building Workshop Series is now open. Join us for this free 4-part world building series where you'll learn more about the treehouse and resourcing your interdisciplinary practice through an income generating offer aligned, right, with your values and your desires. Part 1, see the world rooted in the truth of your desire. Part 2, discover your creative dispatch. Part 3, discover your creative offer. And Part 4, resource a world rooted in the truth of your needs and break up, right, with the posture of precarity that has us waiting for institutions to greenlight our projects. The link to learn more about the Treehouse and join us in January can be found in the show notes. So check it out there. Check it out and register there. Truly, 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 y'all, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the podcast for the World Builders, where we dive into the spells and strategies of Black feminist world building while exploring how offering the skills and wisdom from our journey of transformation might seed, resource, and deepen creative practices rooted in collective liberation. Why? I firmly believe we all came into this world creative. We all came into this world with something to offer, and deep down, we all want to orient around politics of love instead of fear. These are the beliefs we try to honor inside of Seeda School. As always, this podcast will forever be free, but the best way to support the podcast is by sharing it with a friend or taking a screenshot or screen recording of the episode and sharing it on social media so other world builders can find us. Because you will never see a Seeda School ad while scrolling the metaverse. So I'm putting my faith in you and the work instead. Seeda School deeply relies on word of mouth to keep the lights on. So tell a friend to tell a friend if you want to keep these episodes coming. I heard rating and leaving a review helps the show too. Second best way to support is by becoming a paid subscriber to the Seeda School Substack at $5 a month, but only if you have the financial capacity to do so. Until next week, y'all. So be it, see to it, breathe through it.